Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. My name is Nick Palavito. I'll be your host for today's meeting. And today we're going to discuss something that's near and dear to everybody's heart, which will be the Trump team and the Trump appointments. And so we're going to get some people's opinions on this. But first of all, we want to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, who I know who's done his homework because he lives near the Washington, D.C. area, the Tower of Power, as to the Trump team and the Trump nominations. So we're going to bring in David Walker to discuss that. David, take it away. Let's hear what your thoughts are. Looks like we have an interesting.
Well, first, I think it's important to note that Trump has moved expeditiously to name a lot of his proposed cabinet members, as well as a number of other key positions in government. He's led with the National Security and Homeland Security Group because those are obviously top priorities for him. He is yet to name the key players with regard to economic security, and supposedly that's something that he's going to be working on this week. But let's talk about some of the ones that he's made already. And I think it's important for viewers to understand the difference between what's in the cabinet, what's not in the cabinet, what's inside of government, what's outside of government, what requires Senate confirmation and what doesn't require Senate confirmation, and then which nominations are likely to be controversial versus ones that aren't likely to be controversial. So there's a lot of different dimensions you have to deal with. And keep in mind that in the aggregate, there are lots of appointments that have to be made below the cabinet level. In total, there's about 4,000 positions that ultimately will get filled, not all by presidential appointment. In many cases, the department secretaries will end up making appointments for lower level positions with coordination with the White House, some of which may be presidential appointments, Senate confirmation, some of which may be what's called Schedule C, which doesn't require a presidential involvement and doesn't require Senate confirmation. So let's talk about a few of the appointments. The Chief of Staff, which is normally part of the cabinet, Susie Wiles, she does not have to be confirmed by the Senate, so he can pick whoever he wants for that. For Secretary of State, Senator Marco Rubio, I don't expect that he will have any difficulty becoming confirmed. Treasury has not been named yet. There are at least 4 names that have been surfaced as possibilities there. Defense, Pete Hegseth, is a cabinet position that would have to be confirmed by the Senate. There's some controversy about Pete. He's got an honorable background in the military. I think it's the Minnesota National Guard. He served in Iraq, served in Afghanistan. But the Defense Department is the largest agency in the federal government with millions of employees, civilian and military, and questions have been raised about whether he has enough executive experience really for that job, and we'll see how the nomination process goes. Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota for Homeland Security. Robert Kennedy Jr., my apology, for Health and Human Services. He's another controversial appointment that will end up having to have Senate confirmation. Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. There's some controversy around Tulsi's nomination. Doug Burgum, Governor of North Dakota for Interior. A little controversy there. Matt Gaetz, former Congressman Matt Gaetz, proposed Attorney General. Lots of controversy regarding Matt Gaetz. Elise Stefanik as UN ambassador, which last time Trump made that part of the cabinet. It's really up to him. I'm sure it will be since he did it last time. CIA, John Ratcliffe, Energy, Wright, who is CEO of an energy company. And then there's a lot of positions that haven't been picked yet. I mean, as I said, Treasury hasn't been picked. OMB, Office of Management and Budget, which is a key position. Head of Council of Economic Advisors, Veterans Administration, Labor Department, Commerce, HUD, and agriculture. Those are some of the ones that haven't been picked yet. There are other positions that have been named, such as EPA, Lee Zeldin, and Deputy Chief of Staff, and Border Czar. And but the one that people that there's been a lot of publicity about, the Department of Government Efficiency, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. First, it's not a department. It's not in government. Based upon what we've heard so far, it's really more of a Grace Commission on steroids that would be led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Presumably would end up reporting to the president through the director of the Office of Management and Budget, would be focused on how to improve the economy, efficiency, and hopefully the effectiveness of the federal government. To be determined exactly, what the scope would be. But I can tell you there's absolutely no question the federal government's too big and needs to be restructured. And in fact, I've been calling for a government transformation initiative myself for over 12 years. And hopefully this group will focus on a lot of those issues that identified about 12 years ago that we really need to make progress on. And while I think we can save several $100 billion a year, not $2 trillion, but several $100 billion a year, if this is gone about the right way, it's not going to put our finances in order by itself. We're still going to need a statutory fiscal sustainability commission to supplement its efforts, and we're still going to need a constitutional amendment to bind current and future Congresses to fiscal discipline, because that's the only thing that will assure sustainable success over time. So with that, those are my opening comments, and we can get into more details or whatever. And I don't know who else we have on the show today, Nick, but happy to engage.
Okay, we're going to bring in David Kinder, whose runs the Financial Advocacy podcast, and see what he has to say about this wonderful change. And from Australia, we're going to bring in Shaquille Latmer as soon as he gets his computer all set up properly. But David, what are your thoughts about the nominations?
Well, first, thanks for inviting me and having me on again. I agree much with what Honorable David Walker had said. We do have a name for the border czar, which is Tom Homan, which anybody that is tough on the border, there's no one better. He should have no problem depending on how well he gets through the nomination process. And here's the thing that's different between the GOP side and the Democrat side. The Democrat side is far more unified in their voices. The GOP side, far more, a lot of individuals, they believe the same things, but they're going to be more scrutinizing. And so that's just something I noticed. I remember from Trump presidency 1.0, he had some troubles going through with some of that. Matt Gaetz, as David Walker said, he's going to have issues, and he's got issues with one of the top GOP people, which is Kevin McCarthy. So if anyone's going to rally the troops more or less to say that Matt Gaetz shouldn't be in that position, it's going to be Kevin McCarthy. And that's a big name. And those accusations that have not yet been fully fleshed out, and I apologize for the term, that might be an issue because that investigation has not been finalized yet. Tulsi Gabbard, I love the idea of her. I don't know her nearly well enough to give a full comment, but what I like about Trump is that he's going to put people in power that are loyal and also that want to turn the department on its head. And for Tulsi Gabbard, with her story of being on the no-fly list, on the terror watch list, who's been a lieutenant colonel, I mean, how dare they? They weaponize the government against her for whatever reason, and they'll put her at that position. Wonderful. I love that idea. Basically say, don't, it's F around and find out. That's what they're basically saying. And I happen to love that kind of message. U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. I can't think of a greater honor for Mike Huckabee. I'm really looking forward to that. Once I read about it, like, Mike Huckabee, really? But he's been doing tours to Israel. I'm sure he's got wonderful connections there. So anyway, I'm excited about it. Marco Rubio, I was a little surprised that he was nominated to be Secretary of State. I'm just wondering if Donald Trump just wants to send him out of the country. But that's okay. He seems to have a good voice for himself. There's a great clip of him talking about Hamas and that we want to practically wipe off Hamas from the face of the earth unless they can get in line. sounds great to me. I hope we can figure it out. So those are my thoughts.
Well, those are good opening thoughts, and we'll go down under to Australia and see what our friends from a foreign country such as Australia, and he follows the U.S. like crazy, thinks about these. Shaquille.
Oh, we have very deep and passionate feelings about Trump's cabinet position in the United States. No, look, as a casual observer, I don't have too much of a concern, or I'm not particularly surprised by very many of them, except for really Matt Gaetz. I was not expecting that. I really, especially with what happened with Speaker McCarthy and the fact that he sort of runs this coup in the House and then replace Speaker McCarthy with Mike Johnson, who's basically the same sort of moderate speaker. So I don't know what he was trying to prove by doing that. And I thought that was a bit destabilizing for Republicans. So I'm not sure that I would think that he has the requisite legal knowledge and skills and experience to be the Attorney General. So I'd be surprised if there wasn't some pushback from other Republicans for that nomination. But for the others, I thought that most of them were pretty fair. I do like the idea of Tulsi Gabbard being included. I think that the Department of Government Efficiency certainly sounds right. So I think that there's some big changes coming for the United States, and hopefully they can do that in a way which is going to be net positive for the country and its allies.
Okay, we'll bring in Rick Rosner from Los Angeles and see what he has to say about the nominations.
So I'm going off of the stock market, where the week after Trump was elected, the stock market went up. Then Trump made his nominations, the stock market went down. Today it's up a little bit. So, you know,
you can't live by the stock market going up and down. It goes up and down every day.
Okay, sure, but like I think most Americans were shocked by some of the nominations, particularly Matt Gaetz. And, RFK, he's a mixed bag. He says some crazy crap, but he also wants Americans to eat better and have fewer additives in their food. But,
I have a question
he's
for
had no administrative experience. So
I had a question for David, because David's in touch with the politicos of the world and all along those lines. And I know that there is an agency that will have an impact on a lot of organizations that I am involved with, including this one right here, Pod TV and everything. But I really do not know enough, other than he was a writer or one of the writers of Project 25 and everything like that. But I really don't know enough about Brendan Carr to know what his stance will be. It does seem like he's going to be going after folks that are promoting DEI, which is diversity and equity and inclusion and everything. But I really don't know enough about Brendan Carr. So as one in that space, what can you tell me about Brendan Carr? Because I'm not one of those folks that's going to.
I don't know much about him either, Mark. And which position has he been appointed to or nominated?
FCC, Federal
Communications Commission, right? And I think he's already a commissioner at the present time. And I think what the proposal is to elevate him from just a commissioner to being chairman of the commission. That's my understanding. I don't know him personally, so I really wouldn't want to speculate. But let me come back on a couple of things based on comments that have been made. One of the ironies about the Department of Government Efficiency is A, it's not a department. Number two, having two heads is not exactly efficient. And candidly, one of the last things the government needs is another department, because we got too many already. We need to be reducing, consolidating, eliminating, restructuring what we have. So that's the irony with regard to calling it a Department of Government Efficiency. At the same point in time, the need is clear and compelling. And that's why I say that a lot of people understand this is outside the government. So there will have to be an executive order written to give this body responsibility and authority, and this body will end up having to report to people who are inside the government, and then their recommendations will have to be separated between what are things that could be done through executive order, what are things that are going to require legislation, and to the extent that they want to do certain items, like, for example, a line item veto, then what would require a constitutional amendment. And so there's a lot of details that have to be worked out. It's also, how are you going to staff this thing? And how's it going to be funded? I know that if you look at the X site for Department of Government Efficiency, you'll see that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are looking for high IQ, high energy individuals who are willing to dedicate 80 hours a week for a year and a half at no pay to work on this. Now, Rick, I was thinking of you, but I don't know.
I brought it up with my wife, and she said, "Did you see the no pay part?"
Yeah. Well, at first, when I saw this, I said, "Well, this must be something that Elon, who obviously is wealthy, might be underwriting, and maybe they're going to end up paying these people." But as of now, the answer is no. But
perhaps what he'll do is he'll do it the same as he does with Tesla, and you can have shares in the Department of Government Efficiency, and the more money that they save the taxpayer, the more you earn, or something. Maybe that'll be the way to do it. But Dave, was it you or somebody else? I thought it was you that said on a previous show that one of the government departments set up a department of government departments as a liaison team or something. Was it something that you said or somebody said recently?
No, what I said was, Shaquille, which I think you're referring to, was, I used to be on the council for the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and I also have chaired one of their.
That's right, yeah.
Before. And they had a proliferation of committees, so they set up a committee on committees.
Yeah.
But the purpose of the committee on committees was to consolidate and eliminate a lot of committees, but it was a little bit of an oxymoron. But they did.
So you can get a lot of work out of me if you provide good snacks. I'll give you.
Okay, well, if I have a chance to see Elon or Vivek, I'll let them know that that snacks work.
Okay.
So I do want to actually bring something up, though. We were talking about. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, just a real quick little joke, but it is called Doge, and Elon did create Dogecoin. He might pay you in Dogecoin crypto. I don't know. I'm throwing it out there.
Is it Dogecoin or Dodgy Coin? We got to get the pronunciation.
Yes.
But I just want to come back to the markets and the general economic outlook. So we've seen yield curve inversions at pretty extreme levels repeatedly over this year, and I think a little bit last year as well. I'd like to know who had a crystal ball in 2019, because I didn't see anything that would indicate there was going to be any kind of financial calamity in 2020. And we saw the yield curve invert and then uninvert multiple times in 2019. We're also seeing some of the other metrics. Somebody sent me the CAPE metrics for the markets, which is pretty overheated. That would indicate that there would be a pretty calamitous drop. I think the question is how Donald Trump would be able to deal with this, and or whether or not he can avert it by some of the changes that he's going to make. So I do think that's interesting, but that ticking time bomb, the big debt that we often talk about on this show, finally we're beginning to hear people in mainstream media outside of the United States bring that up as being an issue. And I think that the United States really does have to start grappling with that. And certainly I would suggest that should be the biggest story in media in the United States, that every single American should constantly be reminded of just how big the current debts are and the unfunded liabilities. Because it's a huge one.
Shaquille, I think you're right. And that's an issue that I care very deeply about. I'm involved in on a number of different fronts. As you pointed out, the rate for the 10-year has gone up of late. I think the Doge is a good idea. I think that initiative is much needed and long overdue, but I don't think it's enough. And I still think that we need this statutory fiscal sustainability commission that will look at tax policy, spending, things that clearly will require legislation in order to bend down the curve with regard to debt to GDP, rather than continue to see it rise. I think that our people in the United States are not taking the BRICS seriously enough. They need to be taking that a lot more seriously with regard to their efforts to try to move away from the dollar and create an alternative reserve currency. So, time will tell what will happen. But again, I think let's see who some of the key players are. Let's see who the Treasury Secretary is. Let's see who the director of OMB is. OMB is the budget. OMB is regulatory policy. OMB is government-wide management. And OMB is the liaison or the point between the president and any type of commission that might exist, whether it's the DOGE or whether it's a fiscal commission or some other type of entity. So it's, I would argue, much more important in this administration than it's ever been in the past.
Hey, David,
What do you think the future of the social security system is going to be? Because I know you and I disagree a bit on social security. You seem to be, you're wanting to see it be reformed. I just want the social, I think, as a non-American, so it doesn't really affect me. I think what they should do is privatize the thing. Honor commitments, privatize it so that you people aren't forced to pay into a system that doesn't work. What do you think would be the likely outcome, given that you do have pretty aggressive entrepreneurial business people involved in Trump's administration and in his ear? What do you think he's likely to do in relation to this?
Well, first, he said he wasn't going to touch Social Security, and so did the other candidate. They said they weren't going to touch Medicare as well. My personal view is that doing nothing is not an option, because if you do nothing for Social Security, you get a 21% across the board cut in benefits in less than 9 years. That's obviously unacceptable. Medicare has its challenges as well that have to be addressed. And I think the only way that you're going to be able to effectively address it is through this statutory fiscal commission that will actively engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, solicit input, and make a package of recommendations. Similar to what I did in 2012 that got 77 to 97% support on specific reforms that would put our finances in order within a reasonable period of time based upon debt to GDP. I think, how you go about doing these things matters greatly, especially when they involve very difficult decisions. And you have to do it as a package. Trying to do it in a piecemeal fashion won't work. And so I'm hoping that in addition to this DOGE type commission, that the president will also recognize that we need a statutory fiscal sustainability commission to complement what they would do, but to get into issues that go far beyond organization and operations of government that would definitely require legislation. And of course, as I've mentioned before, the constitutional amendment is something that Congress could do, but if they won't do it, then the states can do it through a convention of states to propose such an amendment.
Did you see anybody in Trump's first term who was competent to do what you're talking about? On the list of about 18, he's named about 18 people. You probably haven't seen, or are familiar with, most of them, but do you see anybody who can take this on? And is there any chance that you can get yourself appointed in some capacity?
Well, first, I think the key appointments are going to, from an economic standpoint, are going to be the ones that I mentioned before, whose names haven't been mentioned. Treasury, obviously, which oversees the IRS as well as a number of other functions with regard to domestic finance and a variety of other activities, and is obviously a key liaison with the Fed. OMB, for the reasons that I articulated before, and the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Treasury and OMB are in the cabinet. The chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors aren't, but obviously is part of the White House complex and is a key player. So until I see who are appointed to those positions, I will reserve judgment.
Okay.
I am a political independent, and so that could be a challenge. I will say for the record, which I haven't said before, I did vote for President Trump. I did not endorse either one of the candidates for president because neither one of them focused on fiscal responsibility and had a plan to try to be able to put our finances in order. I am pleased that President Trump is recognizing the need for a government transformation initiative. He calls it the Doge. That's fine. Call it whatever you want. But I would. I've got an op-ed that's about ready to get published that compliments him on that, but says that's not enough. We also need to take some other steps. And I have no idea who he's considering for these positions. So.
I've got a question for the two Daves here and everything, both David Kinder as well as you, Dave Walker. There used to be because y'all know I'm in the mass cultural kind of things. There used to be a very popular show called So You Think You're Smarter Than a Third Grader, and all along those lines and everything. So I was just wondering, because that whole notion of the debt, I think, gets past a lot of people. So we hear this big number, trillions, and all along those lines. But I think a lot of people, it kind of like goes over their head because they're going like, I don't know any concept of what that kind of money looks like or how to even deal with that kind of money. And we know that a lot of people have a hard enough time balancing their own budget and figuring out how to balance the government. So to both of you, how can you break down this in such a way that it's going to be understandable to the basic third grader, which is kind of the principle of that?
Well, I mean, I'll give you one way you can do it. Okay, take the numbers. Take the numbers for the annual budget, all right, and eliminate about 9 zeros, and then show people that. In other words, you got revenue of X, you got spending of Y, you got deficit of Z, you've got debt of double X. Okay, do it on that basis, and people can understand what you're talking about. In addition to that, you can translate some of these numbers into per person. If you just look at the $36 trillion, all right, that's about $105,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. Obviously, every man, woman, and child in the United States doesn't pay taxes, right? We know that over 40% of the individuals who file tax returns pay zero income tax, right? So that means that the relative burden for the people who do pay income tax is a lot higher than that $104,000. So I think what you have to do is you have to be able to translate these big numbers into numbers that people can relate to and can understand, okay? But I think you also have to help people understand why they should be concerned about it, okay? Excess spending and loose monetary policy resulted in excess inflation. They understand that. And that was, if not the number one issue, clearly top two issue in the election. And if we don't put our finances in order, it's going to get a lot worse over time rather than better.
David Kinder, I think you were bringing up some figures and everything, and I had asked the question to you as well.
Well, that was my graphic that I just had shared on the screen there, and that graphic is just to put it into real terms. Now, granted, we barely use actual dollar bills in our wallet anymore. We use debit cards and credit cards. But when you put it to dollar bills, and I actually worked in a bank, I worked with the vault. At the most, I've had $500,000 in that vault. And when you're counting out the money, you start realizing at some point this is real money. And if we count it, $1 per second, what is that? $1 million is what? 11 days? $1 billion or billion seconds would be 32 years. And $1 trillion is 32,000 years. At some point we're talking about real money. And just to be able to put that in perspective, that's what I like this graphic. Now, by the way, I've had to rearrange this graphic. There's another version of it. But every time I post it on social media, somehow it gets flagged to fake news, to some other article that's trying to make an improper point. But the math is the math is the math. So, it's a big problem. I want people to actually put dollars and cents to it. But as far as going back to Social Security, because I do want to address that, Social Security is an age-banded program. And the problem is that most people don't understand Social Security. Nikki Haley figured that out in the GOP primaries. She started talking about, let's get the 20-year-olds, let's get them to be able to claim later ages. That makes perfect sense. But she was booed off the stage. Why? Because they don't understand it. They thought they have to be forced to retire at a different age. But claiming your retirement benefits from Social Security and retiring are two different decisions, but they don't understand that. So our financial IQ as a country is low. Our understanding of Social Security is low, and we have to have, unfortunately, if you're going to run on that platform, you better understand it and be able to convey it properly if you're going to use that as a talking point in an election.
Well, let me come back on that. I mean, first, while I agree with you that it's nice to be able to show, graphics and other illustrations of how much money we're talking about, I would respectfully suggest the only thing that people can really relate to when you talk about this is how do you put it to something that they have to deal with, and that is a budget, okay, or what the relative burden is, and by the way, the 36 trillion is only the down payment, because the real number is 125 plus trillion when you count the other liabilities and unfunded social insurance obligations. Okay, on Social Security, it's not it is not the third rail. The American people understand the program needs to be reformed, and they're willing to accept tough choices on reform if
It's not affecting that.
it's a plan that is based on principles and values that they will agree with. And I proved that in 2012, 12 years ago, where we got 77% support from representative groups of voters in swing states and swing districts for reform. And I'll tell you what it was. And that doesn't mean that this is the only way to do it. There's different ways to do it. Okay. First, you don't make it a means tested program. You don't say that if you make over a certain amount of money, or if you have over a certain amount of money, even though you paid in for years, you get nothing, because that basically turns it into a welfare type of program, and then support for the program would be significantly diminished. But what you do recognize is that some people need Social Security a lot more than other people do. And so therefore, you change the benefit formula, which provides a higher replacement rate for people that are at or near the poverty level, and a lower replacement rate for upper middle income and upper income, but don't eliminate the benefit, all right? You change the cost of living formula to make it more reflective of cost of living for seniors. Their basket of goods is very different than the general population, okay? Thirdly, you raise the taxable wage base cap, not the rate, but which is very regressive, the cap, which was done in 1983 under Reagan, okay, to be able to generate more revenues, if you will, raise that significantly. In addition to that, you gradually increase the normal retirement age based upon increases in life expectancy. Doesn't say, you can retire whenever you want. It's a matter of what benefit you're going to get depending upon the age that you retire. When I say whenever you want, 62 or older, you don't change 62, okay? Then on top of that, you add an automatic supplemental individual account plan for people who otherwise don't have an employer-sponsored retirement program to get automatic savings, piggybacking on the concept of the Federal Thrift Savings Plan, which helps get our savings rate up, gives them control over those funds, chance to get a better rate of return. If you do all of that, you can make it solvent, sustainable, secure, indefinitely, including demographic shifts, which the 1983 Commission did not consider. So by definition, they didn't solve the problem. And that got 77% support, which last time I checked could even override a veto.
Yep.
So I have a question.
If I may ask,
I have a question for the panel, which is it's important to reduce debt. It's also important for the U.S. to continue to lead the world technologically. You've got a couple technologists in Musk and Ramaswamy. Will they make the U.S. a tech paradise, or will they mostly benefit themselves?
I don't think they can benefit themselves anymore, right? They've already made their huge wads. But hopefully what they'll do is they will try to make the government more efficient by reducing expenses, because there's only two ways you can get yourself out of this hole: reduce expenses and increase revenue. With that, I agree with David Walker. Taxable wage base right now in 2024 is 168,600. Now, what people don't know is that once you make beyond this, you do not pay into Social Security anymore. Now, this is very basic for anybody who makes this type of money, because we used to clap. My wife and I would clap, oh, we're above the wage base, which meant that our income taxes, our Social Security taxes went down 12.4%, because when our income goes above the wage base, we don't pay in to Social Security anymore. The problem is most people in the United States don't make more than 168,600. So they're unaware this even exists. They're unaware it even exists. When I told my employees, I said, well, they really need to lift the cap. They didn't know what I was talking about. And I was going, well, once we make a certain amount or more, we don't pay into Social Security anymore. And they look like kind of funny, like, how could that be? It is what it is. And thank you, Reagan, who started the Great Divide by creating this fiction, which needs to be lifted. The other thing they need to do to avoid the subversion of this is they need to bring Social Security taxes onto dividends and interest. I know that guys like Shaquille Wade it, but there's only two ways you're going to solve this problem: increase revenues, decrease expenses.
Don't scrap the program.
I know it's not your problem, but
I'm dead serious. Scrap the program altogether, because with the greatest respect to our highly esteemed panelists here, we currently have a situation where the next generation are not having kids. This is going to kick the can down the road. If you want to say to young people today, hey guys, we're going to need you to pay more and retire later, okay? Have we got a deal for you. And then, by the way, your kids, because you're not having any, your kids, what are we going to do? Make their retirement age 80? As life expectancy keeps going up and we have lower and lower young people, what are we going to do? Move it to 90? Move it to 100? Is that where we're going to be in 50 years' time from now? The program doesn't work for reasons that were highlighted by people like Milton Friedman as early as the 70s, warning that this was going to be a problem. And that's exactly what's ended up happening. If you have a look at alternative type of schemes, for example, Australia introduced a superannuation. So it's a similar program where X percentage of your income is diverted into a retirement type investment. You've got control over that. You can move it from one license provider to another, etc. There isn't as much of a need to mess around with retirement ages because the government doesn't have the money. And the reality is, if you actually have a look at the amount paid in to the Social Security program versus the returns, if you had an incompetent manager, the amount of money that's actually being returned as an investment return on the amount of money that's supposed to be sitting in these trusts is horrendous. So personally, I think if you want to fix the problem, and it's one of the very few times you'll ever hear me advocate for a tax, if you want to fix the problem, what you would do is you would let the new people that are starting to work now, let them have control over their own retirement money, and you would put a tax on that in order to fund the existing liabilities of the programs for the existing people that are there. That would be better than forcing more people into a system that clearly isn't working. And this type of system has been ended largely in many places in Europe for that same reason. The free market is always going to do a better job than government, in my personal view. So I'm not affected in any way by this because I'm not American. But I tell you what, if I was American, I would be pissed if this was a program I was forced to contribute to.
That fantasy would be fine, except for one thing. And David, correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of the Social Security Trust Fund money is used to purchase government debt.
All of it.
True, David?
All of it is.
Excuse me?
All of it is.
Okay, so here's the problem.
The only investment by law, rightly or wrongly, by law, any surplus in Social Security, which we had for many years, but we don't now, we now have a deficiency of revenues over expenses, has to be invested in U.S. government securities. or
There you go.
securities that are backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. So what the government's done is it's bought treasuries,
Right.
and when there's a negative cash flow, you have to cash in those treasuries, and if the government has a deficit, it has to go out and borrow money from third parties. So basically, you move money from intragovernmental to external debt, and all of those bonds will be cashed in based on the current projections within 9 years. And the law also says that you can only pay benefits from trust fund assets, which means that you would have to cut benefits 21% across the board immediately. Oh, by the way, Shaquille, I think we ought to consider all options, but there's one thing that you have to keep in mind, at least in our system, and I would imagine in yours too. It's called political feasibility. You have to be able to get 60 votes in the Senate to avoid a filibuster and a majority in the House and the signature of the president. And you also have to keep in mind that there are very powerful lobbying forces in our country, and I'm sure there are in yours too, but maybe not as powerful as ours.
Only the American ones.
One of which is the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, which is an 800-pound gorilla on these type issues, right? And so my only point is doing nothing is not an option. By the way, the other thing I would agree with you is you don't want to raise taxes on people that are lower income people or even middle income people. And what I laid out did not raise any taxes on them, okay? And one of the real concerns that I have, and let's take it back around again, our birth rate has now declined to 1.62 per female. You need 2.1 to maintain your population. So we need immigration, but we also need to get our birth rate up. And one of the reasons that our birth rate has gone down is because you used to be able to provide a decent standard of living with one member of the married couple working. Now it takes two. In addition, people are very concerned about the future. When 70% of Americans say that they think they don't like the direction that we're headed and that they think the future may not be good as the past, that's a negative for people having kids. And I've had young females tell me that it's one of the reasons that they delay having kids and don't want to have as many kids as maybe their parents did. That's a real issue that we got to come to grips with.
Yeah. David Kendrick.
David?
Okay, I'm looking at this from the consumer perspective, and unfortunately not the educated consumer perspective. Social Security, when you start to compare it to an investment, that's when it fails. I'm not in favor of it being privatized, because when Social Security is thought of as insurance, risk pooled, and you're pooling it with the mortality of other people, that's how it survives for the individual. When you take it and privatize it, you can spend your principal, you can spend your interest, but as soon as that's gone, you're gone. The money is done. Whereas when it's risk pooled, when you have it pooled with other people, and it's based on those people, when they pass away, that money is still available to credit to current people who are still on the program. So the thing is that when you privatize it, you get the same problems that you have with a 401k. With a 401k, you can eventually run out of money unless you annuitize it. You put into a program for lifetime income. There are programs for that, and I'm happy to offer them. But the thing is that once you make that as you make it privatized, you no longer risk pooling. You're not being able to get that longevity credit or the mortality credit added into your retirement planning. So that's a problem that's going to happen. And at the same time, there's the political suicide. And I'm calling it that because anybody that advocates for taking benefits away, they're not going to get reelected. And whoever's the most advocating for themselves in political election is usually those that are older. And they're already they have the time to listen to everybody, like shows like this, to get their educated opinions for it. Younger people, they're certainly turning out. They're getting more involved, which I'm all for. But still, the seniors are not going to vote for someone who's going to voluntarily reduce their benefit. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just come back at a couple of things here? So, firstly, I actually addressed it by saying that if you tax the privatized returns, that would make sure that the liabilities that currently that currently on the books are maintained and met. So I'm not suggesting that we should cut benefits to anybody. But what I am suggesting is that the idea that if nothing's done, there's going to be a 21% cut in benefits. So in order to avoid that, you're going to cut future benefits from future payees into the system by more than 21% is inherently unfair. And then you use government power to say, hey, we're going to force you into this system. It doesn't operate like an insurance company would. If it was a regulated insurance company, they would never be allowed to run the trust the way that they have. If you want to have retirement plans, Nick will help you out. Have a whole of life insurance policy or something like that. There is a number of other alternatives. But the thing is that people can't just get them at in a tax preferred way because of the way the system is. And I think that if people were given the choice to opt out of this system and choose something else, the majority of people would. Given the debt levels that we've talked about and the extra 125 trillion unfunded liabilities, if you want to get an American's attention, you sit down with them, especially if they've got young kids, and you say to them, your government has spent on behalf of each one of these kids $450,000. If I gave you the $450,000, would you spend it the way the government has spent it, or do you think you might give your kid down a payment on a house, or put them through college, or something else? Because that's the reality: is that the government is forcing people to contribute to programs that are wasteful. Finally, you now have somebody in government that wants to do something about it. But again, I don't want to sound too passionate because I'm not an American here, so this doesn't affect me. I've got no skin in the game. But I just see the social security system in the United States as failing Americans, and it was warned about by economists for decades, and they should end the program, in my view.
So I've got to ask this question because back in 2006, if my history is correct, because I was around, I was trying to pay attention, the Pension Protection Act was passed. And I think also at that time, there was talk about privatizing Social Security. Now, first of all, Pension Protection Act required that employers that offered an employer-sponsored retirement plan were required to enroll everybody in it unless you opted out. So I think I remember that being part of that bill, but I also remember the talk about privatizing Social Security. What was different back then compared to what could be proposed
let me
now?
tell you, yeah,
that could work that.
Yeah. George W. Bush, which is Bush 43, tried to reform Social Security, and he wanted to privatize it along the lines of what Shaquille is talking about. He wanted to convert it into a defined contribution program. The problem with that was that he forgot what the second word was in Social Security. It's security, not opportunity. It is a social insurance program. It is not an investment program, okay? And he and Vice President Cheney and a number of other high-level government officials went on the road trying to sell their program, and public support for their program was less after they completed their tour than it was when they started their tour. The fact is the Social Security program is one of the better run programs in the United States government. It gets very high ratings from individuals who are affected by Social Security. It is one of the primary reasons why we've lifted a large part of our senior population out of poverty. It is the only thing that people can count on to provide a stated level of income, which is indexed to inflation through their entire lifetime. There's nothing else that does that for the entire population. And at the same point in time, our savings rate is too low. The program needs to be reformed, but I come back and say, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to provide a basic level of retirement income security throughout a person's life. That needs to be supplemented by private pensions and personal savings. Social Security was never intended to be the sole form of retirement income. Unfortunately, too many Americans rely on it as their sole or primary source of retirement income. But that's a different problem. That's the savings problem, okay? And that's why I'm saying we ought to try to kill two birds with one stone to try to make the make the base defined benefit program solvent, sustainable, secure, but to supplement it with an investment type arrangement that can get our savings rate up, get people to be able to have more of a benefit. And by the way, by the time you run all the numbers, Shaquille, you can't say that it's going to end up cutting people more than 21% in the future, because you got to keep in mind you got a whole new revenue stream coming in that's not there right now. So you'd have to run all those numbers.
So if I was running an insurance company and I was looking at,
that's
hang
not.
on. I know it's not, but that's what they call it. They try to make it out like it is. The thing is that if you were running one, you would look at your forward projections and you would know when you're unlikely to be able to receive the same amount of premiums as before. What we're seeing with the social security system is it's modeled on the idea that there's going to be infinite growth in the population, and maybe that will happen through immigration and other means. But the reality is that if you're saying, look, we're going to make people retire later, the program isn't doing what it was designed to do. And if it's not doing that, and I'm repeating myself, then they should look at alternatives. And certainly, if you want to keep that program and then have something supplementary to that program, maybe that would be a good option, so that people can choose to have more control over other types of investment money.
Yeah,
but you know, with what Nicholas was just saying before about high income earners, that they're not having to pay in because they're not, as I understand your social security system, if somebody earned $1 million a year and had to pay 7% payroll taxes, 70 grand every year, they're not going to get a commensurate benefit from Social Security later. So why would that person choose to do that? They wouldn't. You'd have to force them to do it. And what I'm saying is that it might be better, if you want to force savings, to say to people, look, invest it somewhere else. We'll give you a tax preferential treatment on that, but we are going to tax you on it a little bit in order to buffer the shortfall for all the people that didn't have high income jobs during their lifetime.
Just consider this, and then we need to move on to another topic. But when Social Security was formed in 1935, the average life expectancy in the United States was right at the eligibility age for Social Security. Right? Now, the average life expectancy in the United States is mid to upper 70s. And so when it was formed, there weren't that many people that were expected to have its benefits for very long. But fast forward, the nature of the economy is totally different. Life expectancy is totally different. You know, income dispersion is totally different. And so therefore, what some would argue is, well, you need to consider those things in deciding how the program ought to be reformed. I mean, we're not in the industrial age. Most people are part of the knowledge-based economy. They have the ability, and in some cases, the need to work longer than what historically has been the retirement age of 65, because, you know, they may not be able to support their desired standard of living, you know, if they do that. So, you know, it's a complicated issue, but it is solvable, and I think it's fair to consider all the different options.
And please, David, let's add what also has changed. That today 1% of the population owns 40 to 70%.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, dispersion
of all the assets in the United States. So when Shaquille makes a statement, why should they pay more? Well, if they want to be part of this country, they need to pay more.
This coming from somebody who's just moved to Spain.
And the thing is, they need to make a contribution rather than being the greedy SOBs that these rich people are. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
let me tell you, the reason why I restructured my taxes and the reason why I left Australia in the first place was because of over-regulations, not because of taxes.
Well, and I will say that that's something that's got to be taken on very strongly, because there is too much regulation, and that has a lot to do with economic growth. It also has to do with other.
And that was my quick question, David. This is for everybody on the panel. I know we've only got about 5 minutes to go and everything, but there's this notion that Trump has said that he is going to eliminate certain departments. I said that on World Edition, NASA was one of them. There was other ones, including the Department of Education and a number of others. So with our esteemed panel here, what agencies would you like to see go bye-bye and everything like that? So that's my question for everybody. I'll start with you, David. What agencies would you like to just see go out of here?
My view is the way that it should be approached is what should the federal government be doing and how best to execute on that. I believe that we have too many departments and agencies. And that's why I say it was a little bit of an oxymoron to say we need a Department of Government Efficiency, because we already have too many departments to begin with. I believe there's a great opportunity to consolidate a lot of departments and agencies right now. And to anytime you have a new department, you got more overhead, you have more of an opportunity for redundancy and inefficiency. So I think that there is an opportunity. I'll give you an example. Let's create a Department of Human Capital. Human capital would consider labor, immigration policy, education policy. All of those three things are critically important in trying to optimize our most valuable asset, which is our people. But they might be divisions within a single department, but they don't have to be in independent departments, okay? The other thing I think we have to think about is what are functions that we're doing now at the federal level that really ought to be done at the state level, and and that we ought to devolve those back to the state level. And to the extent that we want to provide financial support through incentives, we can do that, but there's a difference between who's going to execute, on those type activities. I think we've got too much that we're trying to do on a one-size-fits-all federal basis. And if you look at the Department of Education as an example, there are functions and activities that need to be done. That doesn't mean you need a separate department to do it. And what kind of results are we getting? We're not top 25 in the world in math and science performance. And we don't teach financial literacy and civic responsibility. So obviously the status quo is not acceptable and sustainable, but that's just one example.
I looked it up. The U.S. has 438 agencies and sub-agencies. I have no idea. I don't know what they are. I would like the government to be future-facing. That we need to figure out because the future is going to look a lot different than the present or the past. And the U.S. government is constantly behind.
But there's why. You know why? It needs to be future focused and results oriented. And one of the reasons that it's not future focused and results oriented is that even though we've been in business since 1789, we still don't have a future focused, results oriented, and resource constrained strategic framework. We don't have one. Okay. And that should be the job of the Office of Management and Budget on behalf of the president, working with all the departments and agencies, coordinating with Congress. And we also don't have key national indicators. How are we doing? How do we compare to other countries? Because if you don't have that data, you're flying blind in a mountain of debt without an instrument panel.
And by the way, the data that we have on our debt, we're 36 trillion. The European Union, where I'm at right now, 17 trillion, and about basically the same size. And then China, which is much bigger, at least in population, they only have a $2 trillion debt. So you've got to look at what's going on here is that the United States is the world leader in debt, big time.
You got to look at debt to GDP as well.
Other than cutting
Before we get on the point, he wanted to
stop
make it
pandering to the 1% just because they control the country doesn't mean.
Hold on, Nick, before we go, David had a point he wanted to make.
I have one final point. I just want to say that there are more financial literacy classes going on for high schools. I have a video on my YouTube channel on how to use a financial calculator. It's becoming far more popular because teachers don't know how to use this thing, and they better know how to use it if they're going to actually teach a class on it.
That's
So
an
just want to let you know,
HP? I haven't seen
it's an HP 12C.
I haven't seen one of these since I was studying.
Years.
They still make it. It's HP's most profitable thing, and they're still selling. This is my 5th one, by the way. So these are great calculators, and people need to know how to use them if they're going to teach financial literacy.
But thank David Kinder, David Walker, and the rest of our panel at Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.